Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 232 of Stand Up. Joining me today, former Army Infantry Officer Special Agent for the FBI National Security Expert, my friend Clint Watts, and cult expert Stephen Hassan. I'm no expert in anything. I am Pete Dominic. It's time to stand up with me right now. Hey guys, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining me, for subscribing to the show wherever you subscribe to podcasts, giving it a great review, and those of you supporting me with a paid subscription on Patreon. Thank you very much. Almost to 800. Can't do it without you. Really appreciate your support. And let's do this show. There's a lot of news to get to today before I get to my guests. Let's start with, I think, what is the worst news is that my dispute with my neighbor has been escalated. That's right. Today, the town guy showed up, the town code enforcer, in my next door neighbor's lawn. And not the one I'm having the dispute with, but my other neighbor on the other side. And I went out and I spoke to him, and he said they'd received an anonymous report that there was some kind of illegal construction going on because I don't know, because I was running a drill the other day. I have no idea. I worked on the shed all summer. Nobody called anything. The neighbor dispute has been escalated. The town guy couldn't have been happier and cooler with me, and he was on his way saying, I see nothing happening and nothing wrong, and I will dismiss this complaint. I'm sorry to bother you, sir. So, yeah, that's fun. My neighbors are really kind people, really nice to me, really have no idea what their beef is. Anyway, now to more important news that affects you. Let's talk about COVID, shall we? That's hilarious. Absolutely terrifying and horrific what is happening right now in our country with the virus running rampant all over our nation. California now considering a statewide curfew. Doctors are quitting. There's a healthcare shortage. Sick people are spending their last minutes insisting that the virus isn't real. A South Dakota ER nurse recalled how a dying coronavirus patient spent last minutes insisting the virus isn't real. Shouldn't we talk about that? Shouldn't we unpack that a little bit more? What kind of cognitive dissonance does it require? That if you are dying of a virus, you're denying it. Here is South Dakota ER nurse Jody Doring saying her COVID-19 patients often don't believe that COVID is real. Here she is with my friend Alison Camerata on CNN yesterday morning.
You said that even now that the hospital is being overrun with COVID patients. They come in, they're horribly ill, they're gasping for breath, and yet they don't believe they have COVID.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing to watch is that people are still looking for something else, and they want a magic answer, and they don't want to believe that COVID is real. And the reason I tweeted what I did is it wasn't one particular patient. It's just a culmination of so many people. And their last dying words are, this can't be happening. It's not real. And when they should be spending time FaceTiming their families, they're filled with anger and hatred. And it just made me really sad the other night. And I just can't believe that those are going to be their last thoughts and words.
Well, we'll have to discuss that another time. Trying to understand that is something I can't get my mind around. I don't know about you. Also, toilet paper shelves, again, are bare in many stores across the country. Here's a report from Spokane, Washington. I'm looking at toilet paper shelves bare at Spokane area stores amid new COVID-19 rules. Purchase limits are in place at some stores for items that have been popular during the pandemic, including toilet paper, paper towels, and disinfectant wipes. Stop buying toilet paper, everybody. What are you doing? Buy food and water. I mean, that's... Anyway, we got more good news on the vaccine front. Early data showing Moderna, another pharmaceutical company, second company, report preliminary results from a large trial testing a vaccine that their vaccine apparently is 94.5% effective, even better than what we heard from Pfizer. It doesn't matter. This is great news, really great news. The pandemic has infected more than 53 million people around the world. U.S. cases soaring and setting records every day. More than 11 million cases and 246,000 deaths in America. COVID-19 killing more than 1,100 Americans a day, in the last million cases occurring in just 6 days. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. We got to clamp down right now. We've got to. Here's President-elect Joe Biden talking about the importance of sharing information with his transition team right now so they can get ahead of this. And he cuts right to the chase, not pulling any punches with his answer here. That's important.
You spoke about the need to access the outgoing administration's COVID vaccine distribution plans. What do you see as the biggest threat to your transition right now, given President Trump's unprecedented attempt to obstruct and delay a smooth transfer of power?
More people may die if we don't coordinate. Look, as my chief of staff, Ron Klain, would say, who handled Ebola, a vaccine is important. It's of little use until you're vaccinated. So how do we get the vaccine? How do we get over 300 million Americans vaccinated? What's the game plan? It's a huge, huge, huge undertaking to get it done, prioritize those greatest in need, and working our way through it, and also cooperate with the World Health Organization and the rest of the world in dealing with this. And so they say they have this warp speed program that not only dealt with getting vaccines, but also how to distribute this. If we have to wait until January 20th to start that planning, it puts us behind over a month, month and a half. And so it's important that it be done, that there be coordination now, or as rapidly as we can get that done.
I think that right now, governors across the country, Republican governors, like I'm seeing tonight in Iowa, the Republican governor there, have to step up the way Democratic governors have to start mask mandates just as a beginning move. Obviously, have to shut down all kinds of different venues, establishments, gathering places, including schools. Everybody knows the drill at this point, sadly, but that has to happen right now. There's not going to be leadership from the federal government. How are people going to survive without a paycheck? That has to come from the federal government. It can't come from most of the states, which are broke and can't go in debt. States can't do that. Has to come from the federal government. So what do they do without money? How do we kill this disease off or decrease the contraction of it and yet still keep people afloat to pay their bills to feed their family? That's what you need the federal government for. In the meantime, let's keep talking to each other. Let's stay connected to each other. It's going to be a scary next 6 weeks, and the holiday time, it's going to be tough. I think we need to admit that. I think we need to embrace that. And I think we need to do our best to stay connected, to survive, to get to the light in the spring when rebirth comes and a vaccine, hopefully. It's something to look forward to, folks. It's a sense of certainty, and I'll take that. I hope you will as well. Stay connected with me on the Zoom Hangout. Stay connected with us on the Discord platform by joining our community. Sign up now as well. I think it's really important as we head into the darkest time of the year, both literally and metaphorically. And yes, I use that darkness to pitch the podcast and the community that we've created around it. And no, I'm not ashamed of it because it's absolutely helping people, especially me. Okay, one of the most outrageous, biggest stories from Monday's news cycle comes from great reporting at the Washington Post. The Trump administration and his supporters in media and in Congress are trying to pressure a Republican Secretary of State to throw out legitimate, valid voters' ballots. Was that clear? That there is pressure on a Secretary of State of a state. Secretary of State's primary job is to run elections, to throw out ballots that, in this case, the Trump administration thought wouldn't work. They're doing anything they can to delete voters' ballots, legal votes. Well, the Secretary of State of the state of Georgia is a guy named Brad Raffensperger. And in a new Washington Post interview, the Georgia State Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, says that one of President Trump's biggest supporters, senator from South Carolina, and barnacle to anyone who has more power and influence than him, Lindsey Graham, called him up and suggested that maybe he should exclude certain legal ballots. Here is Amy Gardner, who is the Washington Post reporter who got this story, talking to Chris Hayes on MSNBC on Monday night.
Great scoop and great reporting, and all on the record interview with a key official. This is excellent journalism. What's the context of this conversation?
I think the context of the conversation is a real growing mountain of frustration on the part of Secretary Raffensperger about these baseless accusations and sort of pressure that he's been under since Election Day, really, to kind of get in line and talk about the potential that fraud actually is the only reason that Joe Biden could have won. And Brad Raffensperger didn't want to do that. And he's been trying to keep his head down, and he's been trying to support the local election officials who are actually the ones with the power to count the votes and canvass the votes and report the votes up and certify them county by county by county. And I think it took a turn for the personal for Brad Raffensperger in a couple of ways. First of all, he has been called, a rhino, Republican in name only, a congressman from Georgia has said that he's capitulated to the Democrats by not talking about fraud. And then his wife and he both received death threats over text messaging in the past several days. And I think he really hit a breaking point where he wasn't going to stay quiet anymore.
All right. That is Washington Post staff reporter Amy Gardner on MSNBC with Chris Hayes last night. In that article in the Washington Post, she writes, the atmosphere had grown so contentious, Raffensperger said, that he and his wife, Tricia, had received death threats that in recent days, including a text to him that read, quote, "You better not botch this recount. Your life depends on it." So apparently he got fed up with that and decided to stand up against and come out openly and publicly and speak to reporters. He also said that every accusation of fraud will be thoroughly investigated, but that there is currently no credible evidence that fraud occurred on a broad enough scale to affect the outcome of the election. That's always the key point when we're talking about election fraud, irregularities. You say, I understand there's always irregularities, there's always problems. Sometimes there's fraud here and there, generally, and it differs. It can be different kinds, but really there's no interest in someone voting fraudulently because it's a crime and it's not worth it because it's not going to affect the outcome. It's just your one vote that you're exercising. Nonetheless, when there have been operations of fraud, they almost always get caught. But finally, and most important, the question always has to be, were any irregularities or problems in the election? Was there any number of them that would actually affect the outcome of that election? And the case in Georgia and everywhere else, the answer so far is no. And now here's a little bit more on this. Here is Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger on CNN with The Wolf.
You described to the Washington Post a conversation you had with Republican Senator Lindsey Graham on Friday. You came away with the impression that he essentially wanted you to look for ways to toss out mail-in ballots. What exactly did he say to you?
Well, he asked if the ballots could be matched back to the voters. And then I got the sense it implied that then you could throw those out and he really would look at the counties with the highest frequent error of signatures. So that's the impression that I got. But, we've got signature match in place. We have signature match when you request the ballot, absentee ballot, and then we have signature match when it comes in. And then with our new online absentee ballot portal, that has photo ID. And so we feel really confident that the election officials have done their job. And that's what they're charged to do, is do their job and make sure the signatures match.
I just want to be clear on this, Mr. Secretary. You say Senator Graham wanted you to find ways to get rid of legally cast ballots because CNN asked him about these allegations. He denied them. He says that's ridiculous. His words, that's ridiculous.
Well, it's just an implication that look hard and see how many ballots you could throw out. And I think that they were looking at that as part of a court case. And one actually was subsequently filed, wasn't it?
There you go. That is Ben Raffensperger, Brad Raffensperger. Who knows the guy's name? He's the Secretary of State of Georgia. And why is Lindsey Graham, Senator of South Carolina, calling the Secretary of State of Georgia, asked the Secretary to throw out legally cast votes? I mean, this is another yet major scandal. Seems like we've got one every single day. And by the way, I want a little credit for warning about this scenario. This is one of the things I thought would probably happen, that there would be pressure from conservative commentators, right-wing nutjobs, Donald Trump, for Republican secretaries of state to cheat and to hide ballots or toss out ballots or do whatever it takes to help Trump win. And the truth of the matter is, if it's your primary job to conduct a free and fair election as Secretary of State of a state, that's what you're going to do because you don't want to get caught otherwise. You don't want to screw up. It's going to look really bad if the election in your state screws up. There's going to be huge problems to your reputation, to your career, if there's major disruptions in your state. That is your job as Secretary of State. They take a lot of pride in doing a good job when they have a free, fair, and clean election. And that's what he is alleging. And that is in contradiction to the interests of the Trump administration, who lost in Georgia. In other news, apparently last week, the president sought options for attacking Iran. You know, why not start a war on the way out? New York Times reporting the president was dissuaded from moving ahead with a strike by advisors who warned that it could escalate into a broader conflict in his last weeks of office. President Trump asked senior advisors in an Oval Office meeting last Thursday whether he had options to take against Iran's main nuclear site in the coming weeks. The meeting occurred a day after international inspectors reported a significant increase in the country's stockpile of nuclear material. Four current and former U.S. officials told the New York Times on Monday. Let's get some Twitter reaction to this, shall we? First up, Walter Schaub. It appears Trump's plan for his last days in the White House consists of golfing, tweeting, selling off government land, trying to kill Americans by withholding pandemic information from the president-elect, leaving Afghanistan without planning, and asking generals if he can attack Iran. Richard Haas, president of the Council on Foreign Relations, friend of mine and of the show. The issue re a preventative attack in Iran goes beyond retaliation. Such an action would set Iran back, but also increase its effort to develop nuclear weapons far underground, out of military reach, and complicate international attempts to rein in such efforts. Reporter Rula Jabril tweets, when Trump took office, Iran had 102 kilograms of enriched uranium. That stockpile is now 2.5 tons. Maximum pressure has been an unmitigated disaster. So Netanyahu, MBS, and MBZ are pressuring Trump and Pompeo to go out in a blaze of shock and awe against Iran. And I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, he wanted options to attack Iran for what? Not following the agreement that he pulled out of? Scary times, scary times. Speaking of foreign policy, the president, many media outlets reporting that U.S. military commanders are anticipating a formal order is going to be given by President Donald Trump as soon as this week to begin further withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan and Iraq before Trump leaves office on January 20th, according to two U.S. officials who are familiar with the president's decision-making. The Pentagon has issued a notice to commanders known as a warning order to begin planning to draw down the number of troops in Afghanistan to 2,500 troops and 2,500 in Iraq by January 15th. Currently, there are approximately 4,500 U.S. troops in Afghanistan, 3,000 troops in Iraq. I mean, these kinds of decisions being made at this point, they shouldn't be made by this president or any president during a lame duck session. All right, one more thing that I want to play for you. It's one of my favorite senators from Ohio. It's Sherrod Brown on the Senate floor Monday. He asked his Republican colleagues to stop endangering all the Senate workers and simply wear a mask when presiding over the Senate. The senator presiding over the Senate at that moment was Alaska's Dan Sullivan, and Sherrod Brown scolded him, and I just thought this was great.
President?
Senator from Ohio.
I'd start by asking the presiding officer to please wear a mask as he speaks, and people below him are, I can't tell you what to do, but I know that the behavior...
I don't wear a mask when I'm speaking, like most senators.
Well, most senators...
So I'll put it back on, but I don't need your instruction from...
I know you don't need my instruction, but there clearly isn't much interest in this body in public health. We have a president who hasn't shown up at the coronavirus task force meeting in months. We have a majority leader that calls us back here to vote on an unqualified nominee and at the same time to vote for judge after judge after judge, exposing all the people who can't say anything, I understand, the people in front of you and the presiding officer, and expose all the staff here, and the majority leader just doesn't seem to care.
The Democratic senator from Ohio, Sherrod Brown, scolding the Republican senator from Alaska presiding over the Senate there, Dan Sullivan. I thought it was worth it. All right. Now, I just want to take a moment real quick before I bring on my first guest to connect with you and say, if you are struggling, reach out and connect with someone. If you don't have someone, reach out and connect with me. find somebody to connect with on a regular basis. Yesterday, one of my best friends from childhood, who I have a regular Marco Polo app conversation, the video app, he told me about men's soccer game that was happening. We grew up playing soccer. I don't really follow sports much, but this is a type of a sport, an event, the men's national team, that I could pay attention to every once in a while and get excited and watch with him. I really like soccer. So yesterday afternoon, I actually took an hour while I was actually doing other stuff in the studio as well, working, and watched that show, and I felt connected to him, and I felt like it was something to distract me. So whatever it takes, find those things, connect with those people, and if you don't have them, then connect with us here in the stand-up community. You've always got us. Sign up for a subscription at patreon.com/Pete Dominic, or go to the paid subscription link in the show notes. Okay, so joining me now, my first guest is a distinguished research fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. He is also a non-resident fellow at the Alliance for Securing Democracy. He's a national security contributor for NBC News and MSNBC. He is an expert on terrorism, specifically the rise of social media influence. He's the author of a great book called Messing with the Enemy, Surviving in a Social Media World of Hackers, Terrorists, Russians, and Fake News. You can also read him in the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and so many other media outlets. He served as a U.S. Army infantry officer. He was an FBI special agent. He was the executive officer of the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point. He's testified in front of the Senate. He is just an awesome guest on the show. He's great at communicating these issues that he studies, and I always love talking to him. We've become really good friends. Here he is on Twitter, by the way, at Selected Wisdom. The latest from Clint Watts.
Pete, how you doing?
So much better when you're right side up.
That's right. You don't want to get sideways with me.
Oh, hey!
There you go. That's a great line. You should use that one.
It's almost as if you're writing that one down on the dry erase board because you think it's that good. I should write that
down right now. No, I figured you didn't need the listings of my guys tracking Rudy Giuliani nonsense. So
no, I did admire the picture. Looked like a Simpsons-esque character. That's all I saw.
Oh, this one?
Yeah. Oh, you left that good. Good.
That was my original Twitter photo.
I'm a doodler. That's awesome. Are you a doodler? Are you an artist?
No, that was the only thing I knew how to draw in like fifth grade art class. And so I would draw that for everything. And then when I used to talk to terrorists back and forth, they were like, you're a sock puppet account. This was a terrorist in Somalia, Omar Hamami. So I took my sock off and I drew the same face and I put a cigarette in it. And he was so screwed up by that. He thought it was hilarious.
Because he's
from Alabama. He was like, you win.
That's awesome. But that's a way of proving, like, that'd be like, send me a picture of you holding today's newspaper. You're answering him that you're not a bot by answering the allegation by being that specific. I didn't explain it well, but I think.
Yeah, he had done that to me once before. Where I was like, how do we know this is Omar Hamami? This could be some kid just screwing around with a Twitter account. So he was in the middle of Somalia. He held up a picture with the day's date on it and sent it right back. That was pretty cool.
I was just listening to you on a podcast. I think Mike Morrell, he has is that his?
Yeah.
Podcast? He sounded
Intelligence Matters.
Yeah. Who is that guy? He sounds so young. He was the acting CIA director. I can't.
Oh, yeah. He was like in charge. He basically was the head of counterterrorism at one point.
I know who he was, but I wasn't. I got to look it up. I got to look it up.
I want to say he was acting director at one point, and he was like the deputy director at another point. I would have to look it up, but yeah, he was kind of, everyone knew him in counterterrorism as the person for counterterrorism.
Yeah. Well, interesting podcast and a great conversation, but whenever I listen to someone like you, who I know pretty well, talk somewhere else, I'm like, I want to ask him about that if I get the opportunity. And I thought, I don't know if I should have asked you this ahead of time, maybe you don't even want it, but I thought it'd be really interesting to talk about what that plot of the Portland 7 was, because I think it's really relevant right now.
Yeah, it is. I mean, now the Portland 7 would be all heavy white guys, right, with long beards. It's
the work the FBI does. You did that work. It's doing it now, but the targets have changed in terms of their demographic and their interests. How did I do?
Yeah. And Oregon is one of those places, ironically, where has always been a red state with a giant blue blob, up around Portland. Like it's actually very conservative. The further east you go, there was always a sizable amount of white supremacy, out towards Idaho, that valley, Spokane, Washington, out through there. And so today the Proud Boy stuff is just the tip of the iceberg, on the outer seams of it are hardcore, violent white supremacists. Yeah.
On the outside of the Proud Boys
look, the Proud Boys stuff is mostly they're there to take pictures of themselves marching and things like that. Right. And sort of show of force kind of things. But in the white supremacist space, what we call the accelerationists, which are people that are trying to accelerate a race war.
Okay, let me try to differentiate though between the Proud Boy. This is what I felt like about what happened in DC this past weekend, which was, it reminds me of friends of mine in college and high school who went to bars looking for a fight. Let's fight. Let's get in a fight tonight. Guys who would drink a lot, especially. I never understood that impulse. None of it, really. But these guys on any side, it could be any ideology, but groups of people that go to now show up at protests, waving being as prideful as they can in whatever they believe, and then end up, there's always some fights, some fist fights usually, sometimes some knives, every once in a while a gun, but that's what seems to be a lot of what the Proud Boys are doing. They're not organizing and plotting online to take over, kidnap the governor of Michigan. That's a different interest group.
Correct. Yeah, and so I think that's one way, because the waters are so muddy and they overlap, surely there's a Proud Boys member who's also part of a more hardcore white supremacist group, right? It's a confluence. There's not lines in the sand. So I think what's interesting is right now in America, there is a segment which you could call accelerationist, and this is white supremacist. It's also the misogynist, incel type characters, that are really about men versus women.
Is there really a lot of that? I've never really done a deep dive on that ideology. It scares the shit out of me. And I always want to believe that it's not that pervasive, but there's a lot of that ideology in there.
Yeah, there's a surprising amount of it when you look at the overlap between what would be called the base or Atomwaffen, are kind of the two most hardcore of the violent white supremacist groups that want a race war, with fringe people of incel, which isn't a group, right? It's more of a movement of people that are misogynist. And then you can kind of overlap that also with the most extreme fringe of the Second Civil War crowd, which is the Boogaloo sort of stuff that you hear about. People that just want to accelerate a civil war. And they all kind of overlap. They don't necessarily work together in an organized way or a group way, the way you and I would think, but they're in the same online communities. Oftentimes they talk about the same kind of wants, but they're not necessarily all in it for the same reasons. It's kind of a convergence of very angry men in different groups that want to drive towards violence. I think that's the best way to describe it.
But in a way, I mean, it's still a lot of American citizens that could otherwise be doing something productive and be a part of the solution as opposed to the problem, much of which that they make up. They don't even believe in, I don't want to generalize about what they believe, but they could be a part of the solution. And we could all, I hear all these people saying, we've got to govern everybody. If we govern them well, they won't become insurgents. I hear people like Max Brooks say on Real Time. And that sounds great. But, if we give people opportunity, that maybe they won't be so bitter and embittered. And that includes, obviously, minorities of every stripe.
Yeah, this is where the weird thing about, there's always this diagram in political science, which is liberty versus control and socialism versus capitalism. You get this sort of quadrant of belief systems clashing, with each other. And that's why, in the online space, you'll see anarchists oftentimes overlap with libertarians, right? In a weird way, when you watch their discussion space, because they're all about freedom, I have freedom to do whatever. They tend to overlap, right? Yeah. They share a lot of different beliefs, but coming at it from different directions. Those that don't want to be controlled versus, those that want more control, fascist and communist, which is the old I used to talk about what's called red-brown alliance, in Politico, which are people that want to control society. They want to do it in different ways. They tend to overlap or converge at different points.
It seems like, but I mean, if you were to strike the words control and what you just said, it seems like it's also able to describe in terms of like individualism versus collectivism, which, only one makes sense to me biologically. Like we have to work together to solve big problems, period. And so the individualism ideology doesn't strike me as one that's serious to think about if you're going to live in a community. I mean, unless you're off the grid, good luck.
Right.
Good luck out there in the woods, buddy. I mean, if you have solar, my buddy made his own solar panels. He's got car batteries that run them in his house in Maine that he also built. He really doesn't need much. He's a paramedic, but fine. Good luck.
But few have that kind of skills. And what tends to happen is, when the Pearl Harbor moment for that person's life occurs, then they need the system, right? Like that's the interesting part of COVID, right? Like they complain about socialism, but they better get their Donald Trump signed check as well.
Well, I heard a great analysis. Yeah, of course, a great analysis about this scenario you're talking about. If you live out in the woods and you're all alone or just with your family, whatever, and you get an easily curable infection, you can easily die. You don't have antibiotics or some kind of other health emergency. And there's this great analysis about climate change and how it's going to change. Now we're going to migrate and how some people are buying property and they're really moving out in the grid so they won't be affected. And it's like your issue is going to be like a heart attack and something that could have been remedied if you were around people. It's safer to actually live in a community was the overall analysis of that. I don't know if there's anything more to say about it, but I wanted to ask you about the work that you've been doing up until the election, and then I really wanted to get to what your concerns are on the work that you're doing right now in this crazy time period where everything is in upheaval, and then mixed in with all of it, a horrific pandemic only looking to get worse. So first, looking back, you had great analysis. You guys were doing all kinds of great work looking at who the foreign threats, domestic threats were to the election itself. How do you talk about and how much data do you know about who did act and what they did and what people need to know? It's really important that even though we have a feeling of the outcome of the election, that we understand what did happen, in fact, and you're doing great work on that. So what do we need to know?
So I think aside from the behavior of the president, there's lots of good news. Like looking at foreign interference in the election, man, the whole system rallied to fight that off, meaning like the Russians were still doing what the Russians do, hacking, disinfo, propaganda. And that was stymied a good bit, either from the State Department, from the FBI, which did disclosures, Cyber Command, it's come out in the papers, was doing things to make it very difficult for the Russians and the Iranians and the Chinese, for election defense and polling places. When you look at DHS CISA, which has been in the news the last week, they did really well. And then you look at the social media companies, they did tons of takedowns. They've done a lot of moderation of conspiracies, more than ever probably in the last 2 months.
Is there a lot that we don't see with social media companies? You see the overt warnings, but I mean, is there a lot to say about what they've been doing principally and systemically?
Yeah, I think it's become boring for most people, but they do takedowns every single month now, and that did not happen 4 years ago. You can look across all the big platforms. They're doing sizable shutdowns of foreign influence efforts every month. And Facebook puts out the report every month. Twitter did a lot of disclosures. So did YouTube. So I think when you look at it from just a strictly cross-border foreign interference, they're doing what they can. And the big hiccup, which is interesting, I'm not excited, but I'm interested to see, is like the New York Post story about Hunter Biden's laptop, showing up at a computer store. Maybe it was him, like Hunter Biden drops off his laptop at a computer store in Delaware, some crazy scene. And the New York Post story, which was essentially about that, it was the moderation which Twitter and Facebook did is going to be, something we have hearings about going into next year, I'm sure.
Oh,
and it's interesting because there were so many warnings about foreign influence. Giuliani had been over in Ukraine. The stuff about Hunter Biden was from Ukraine. the guy Giuliani was with was designated as a Russian agent. So when the tech companies saw it like come out, I think they thought, this is it. Like, this is our big moment to defend the election. And they pulled the trigger. And then it was like they couldn't backstop why they pulled the trigger of moderating content, right? So it's going to be interesting.
Wow. Yeah.
The Republicans, are like, you censored free speech or whatever. And New York Post, Facebook chose a different approach, was like to try and fact check it and slow roll it. Twitter knocked it all the way offline, but then said it was coming from hacked materials. But then you can point to thousands of articles about hacked materials or stolen materials, online. So it's going to be really interesting to watch Capitol Hill yell at them about losing their what's called Section 230 status as a neutral platform, right? And I'm not sure anything will change. It'll just be an interesting argument, about their power.
Well, let me just ask you to go back and say, in terms of what people don't know about the Rudy Giuliani, Hunter Biden laptop, the New York Post story, is there any evidence that Hunter Biden dropped his laptops off? Is there any evidence that the laptops that and the hard drives were ever Hunter Biden's, or was that story completely fabricated by foreign intelligence given to Rudy Giuliani, who then dispersed it? Or am I missing something?
I think the story was created by domestic and might have elements of foreign nonsense, sort of dropped into it. And the question really, when you watch everything that's gone on in this last election, is Giuliani was to 2020 what Paul Manafort was to 2016.
Oh, interesting.
Except for Paul Manafort was kind of behind the scenes, right? And Trump didn't know. And this time in 2016, Giuliani was right out there. We had the whole impeachment trial, about Giuliani and his antics in Ukraine. And Trump knew about it, right? Like everyone knew about it this time. The same situation came down, and it's still this just giant weakness, which most of the disinfo, most of the things we're worried about today are domestic in origin.
And that's the biggest story that came out, and it was not a story, and it was fabricated and never should have been printed, and we can talk about that. But nothing else did come out. There was never any Durham investigation blow up or investigation into the Russia investigation, which it's so important that we never stop talking about that and what happened. But when you say the system rallied in this election, you mean who did what, and what were the threats? I mean, you've talked about the foreign threats, obviously being China, Russia, and Iran, and you've ranked their importance and how effective they are. But specifically, what did government do right? You mentioned the State Department.
Look, the FBI, contacted the social media companies. Social media companies did takedowns. The State Department outed different disinfo outlets connected to the Russians so that the tech companies could do something about it, and also people could be aware. With voting machines, like CISA has the rumor control website, which is trying to debunk as fast as possible conspiracies coming out of either the White House, the Republican Party, or, even from afar and foreign influence. And then, for example, the Iranians, when they kind of pulled some shenanigans with, targeting voters and voter rolls with emails to scare them about the Proud Boys, right or wrong, the DNI came out and did an announcement about it. So that's all good. It just also shows that as long as you have a political party or candidate that's willing to take foreign help, that's the giant weakness of the entire thing. Like the institutions can't do anything about that. What would they do?
Yeah, I'm so glad you made that point. It's always the most important point. That's why it's in a way exceptional. That's why I feel in a way, Clint, that Trump is one of a kind. Most governors, mayors, congressmen, senators, much less presidents of the United States, wouldn't take foreign help on an election because the obvious conflict of interest that lies there for that person. That's what makes Trump so much different. It would seem he would do anything to win. Take any intelligence from any foreign actor, from Al Qaeda to North Korea, if he thought it was going to hurt his opponent or help him somehow.
Yeah, and this is, I think, the big challenge for the Biden administration that comes in is that there are two Americas right now. There's Trump's America and the rest of America, which I would call the real America. Like, for the most part, people are not part of that system. Even those that voted for Trump, I think a large chunk of them are not into the Trump system, right? Like they vote on policies that they think Trump will deliver on, whether he is aware of it or not. But that is also in the international space going to be fascinating to watch, which is the big players, especially in the information space, are not going to be states. It's going to be Bannon on a boat with a Chinese dissident.
Why is he in jail? Isn't he under federal indictment?
Yes.
What is he doing?
That is going to be one angle. It's going to be MBS. We think of him as Saudi Arabia. No. He's the leader of a cone of influence that's well-resourced, right? Like Mercer was a version of that with Bannon the first time around.
His billionaire funder, Mercer.
Yeah, and Trump will be one. He's going to stay in the media space, right? And so the influence, you're going to watch the Biden team come in and they'll go, let's do this with Russia. Let's do this with China. And meanwhile, you'll have this whole parallel seam of Trump, Bannon, oligarchs, MBS, maybe some folks in Israel that are like, okay, you do whatever you want. We have more money, more resources, more data. We have our own private military companies. We have our own big data centers. We don't care what you do with China. Like, we're going to do what we want, right? And so that's going to be weird watching the old Obama staffers come in and go, let's have a diplomacy roundtable with Ukraine, like, who cares? Like, they don't have any power. Yeah.
Well, hopefully they keep Giuliani on board in their future ventures so he can keep fucking everything up for Bannon and Trump.
I have to say, he's more of an anchor in that boat than someone rowing at this point.
I have a minute and a half left with you, and I want to just ask you what you're most concerned about or what you're watching right now in this, lame duck session before the inauguration.
Just the overall deliberate destruction of the state, meaning that, look, Trump
just that
hand over power.
Only the overall destruction of the state.
Meaning that, hey, let's declassify everything.
Right.
Even though it's to our enemy's benefit, right? Let's cripple the rollout of the vaccine so it hurts Biden's term. Let's mess with the economy so that it can't get back on its feet, out of spite. That's the kind of stuff that I worry about. Let's fire everybody so no one's really in charge of any of these agencies and they're in turmoil for 3 or 4 months, starting off with the next term. That's what I'm concerned about.
The likelihood of many of those scenarios isn't probably high, some of them more than others, but
right.
all very legitimate concerns, which is what you do for a living. You're concerned for a living.
I have some good news, though, Pete, which is we did not see a big shooting on Election Day. We did not see a bunch of people mobilized for a terrorist plot. The FBI did preemptive arrests. So did local law enforcement. I'm fingers crossed that keeps going, right? Like, even the rallies this weekend, they were not that big.
No, and they were limited almost to D.C., almost one city. It's like nothing like what we've seen for Black Lives Matter in terms of protests, peaceful protests mostly, by the way.
We didn't see anyone, no Kenosha, Wisconsin kid running around with an AR-15.
Good point.
So I'm hoping that holds.
Yeah, I agree. Those are all really good points, as were all the rest that you made. Thank you for your time, as always, Clint. Really appreciate it. Love talking to you, buddy.
Thanks, Pete.
All right, that's Clint Watts on Twitter at Selected Wisdom, and so glad I get the opportunity to talk to Clint. This is what we do here on Stand Up. We invite experts to join us, as well as other interesting folks, and including you. If you want to be on the show, if you want to talk to me on the record, answer some of my questions, you feel like you've got something to say, reach out. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. If you've got a specific expertise, credibility, or know someone who does, put me in touch with that person. Always looking for great new guests to join me here on the show that can teach us about important ideas, solutions, life hacks, trying to grow, trying to make life better, and trying to understand how it all works, as well as each other, all the time here on Stand Up. And that is why my second guest on today's show is a really, really great person to talk to. He's a mental health professional. He's been helping people leave destructive cults since 1976 after he himself left the Moonies cult. Have you ever heard of them? The Sun Myung Moon's Unification Church? He's the author of several books, including Combating Cult Mind Control, and most recently, The Cult of Trump. A leading expert explains how the president uses mind control. I've talked with him several times, 3 times, I think, this year, and it's been a while since we talked, and I wanted to talk to him about what it meant for Trump supporters post-election, if he ever does admit that he lost, and what those of us who aren't Trump supporters can do, if anything, to connect with them, to understand each other, to get along, to work side by side, to live in communities with each other. Also, I just love this guy. He's such a kind guy with such a kind voice and way of communicating. I really enjoy talking with him. Here he is, Stephen Hassan, right now. Now, welcome back to the show, Stephen Hassan. Very glad to have you joining me again. We spoke several times over the past year. I've become a real fan of your work, as have many of my listeners. Why am I having you on today, right after the election? Well, for several reasons, sir. I think you probably know why, but let's start with the fact that you put out a tweet saying that we need to try to figure each other out now. We need to try to listen to each other. We need to reach out even to Trump supporters because they're part of a cult. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah, well, I've been saying that message for 44 years, that if you have a family member, a friend, or come across someone who's involved in a very black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil, involvement with a group or ideology, that having meaningful, respectful interaction, being curious, is going to have a lot more positive impact than calling the person names, they're brainwashed, they're stupid, or that you're in a cult. And when people, when I talk with Trump members and QAnon people, they like to say, I'm in the cult. I'm in the cult of Soros. I'm a libtard. I've been brainwashed by CNN. I don't react defensively. That's really interesting that you are saying that. Please tell me more. Why do you think that? And I want to engage in, meaningful conversation. And the underpinning of my work is because I was in a mind control cult, as in the Moonies. I've come to understand that as much as you may be unduly influenced and programmed by a destructive cult, that the real you is still in there and wants to know the truth, wants to be free, doesn't want to be exploited or lied to. And so there's a dissonance in people's minds between who they really are and their integrity, and being involved with a group that lies and hurts people and hates people, etc. And I guess what's coming to my mind, Pete, at the moment is just my friend Arno Michaelis, who was one of the original white power band member neo-Nazis, who in his story, he was treated nicely by this Jew who employed him. And when he didn't have food, gave him half a sandwich, and people were nice to him. And it really, I keep saying it, it sounds idealistic and maybe trite, but love is stronger than mind control. And the way to heal America is to understand mind control and understand that there are cults of all types, and there are ethical cults where you know what you're getting into and choose to be passionately involved, but are free to leave whenever you want without penalty, right? Free to read whatever you want to read, and don't feel like if you change your mind, everyone will turn their back on you and think you're the enemy. Unlike destructive cults, this kind of binary all or nothing, if you're not part of them, then you're garbage or, should be exterminated in some extreme cases.
Do you see, how do you differentiate between what certain cult members believe? Isn't it always on kind of a spectrum, regardless of the cult, in terms of how committed they are and what they believe? Because I think it's easy for us to just imagine that all Trump supporters believe blank, specifically might be supporters of QAnon or be at least open to that kind of stuff, which is really, really crazy, wild, hard to believe conspiracy stuff. How do you differentiate? How do you know how far gone someone is? And I'm not sure if I'm using disrespectful language or not, but I'm trying to just understand how to talk about the spectrum.
No, I don't think it's disrespectful. I think it's a great question. And honestly, what I've learned is that every person is unique. And while I may understand patterns of mind control, destructive, unethical influences, the keys to the person, thinking for themselves is in them. And so the art is really how to build rapport and trust get them to talk about their experience, especially people. I've met people who say, I was a Bernie supporter and, I was so upset, with Hillary that I voted for Trump and I never, it was. And then I say, well, so what was your first experience when you remember seeing Trump for the first time? Oh, I thought he was a blowhard, or I thought he was, a con man or a narcissist or whatever. And I go, that's really interesting. So you thought he was a narcissist, and now you're out in the streets protesting for him. Help me understand what was your experiences. And if I may just hold up a couple of things. This is from my website, my influence continuum from ethical to unethical, that you're correct. Things are on a continuum or a spectrum. And ethical is informed consent, and lies are over here. And respecting your individuality is here, and wanting you to be a dependent clone is over here. Having free will is over here, and being a loyal, blind, fanatic follower, like Michael Cohen had been before, is over here. And then the other thing, if you don't mind me holding up, is this graphic, which talks about how most people involved with destructive cults are fringe members from my point of view, and they really have no idea what's going on inside, much less at the very top. And while you may say, oh, I'm free to do whatever I want, I'm in this group, but I'm free, as you analyze it for, in a more total holistic way, you realize, there really are restrictions here.
When you look at those who have left cults, even including yourself, and other types of cults, what are the kind of the hallmarks and that you see? How does it happen? And how much are you seeing right now that Trump lost? What does that change for people who are kind of members of his cult of personality or of QAnon followers who predicted, of course, that he would win? What does it change, if anything, that he has lost?
Yeah, they predicted he would win by a landslide, much less lose so substantially. So there's a lot I want to say in a short amount of time, but essentially everybody is different. And the generalization I want to say is that people do the best they can with the information and their experience allows them to have. And when I watch documentaries used to recruit people into QAnon, I can put myself in people's shoes and see how they can get hooked by truths that are sprinkled in with half-truths that then morph into total fabrications.
Right.
And but not everybody believes everything, and ultimately nobody wants to be a fool. And nobody, we all have positive pretty much self-images, and we like to think we're smart, even if we, don't have a college education or a graduate degree. Most people think that they're pretty smart. And so the issue really is if we were watching what they were watching, or we had smartphones that were tuned into the channels that they were, we'd probably believe that too. What's different for me is when you're not in a mind control cult, you can hold a bigger view. You can say, this is what I believe in, why. This is what you believe in, why. And you can step into other people's shoes and come back to yourself and not lose yourself. But when you're in the cult mindset, you can't really step out of your shoes into the other side's shoes. And if you do, then you're literally on your way out of the cult. Like, that's one of the higher level techniques that I teach about switching perspectives. Because if you think about it, the cure to blind faith is perspective and education.
So have you seen people move away from Trump or QAnon theories in the past year, much less since the election? I mean, you have.
Absolutely. And some now are more high profile and being picked up by media to tell their stories. And I'm involved with a group of my friends who are ex-cult members. We want to do a hashtag movement called I Got Out.
I did see you tweeting that. Yeah, I saw you tweeting that. Yeah, I like it.
So the idea is, instead of what people have been hearing, those who are in the cult of Trump, people who are in QAnon, that only stupid, crazy people believe those kooky conspiracy theories. If they understand that intelligent, educated people can get lied to and systematically indoctrinated, and we can leave and not be so ashamed and guilty, but like, damn, that took up a few years of my life. I wish it hadn't, but time to move on. And some of my friends were in cults for 20, 30 years, and they're very inspired by listening to their stories. My friend Hoyt Richards comes to mind because I just spoke with him. He was the first male supermodel, was in a UFO cult for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Gave millions of dollars that he earned from modeling to the cult leader.
Yikes.
And he, was able to get out, and he wants to help educate people because he was at Princeton. He was a quarterback on the Princeton football team when he got recruited into the cult.
How did he get out? Is there any way that we can help people right now? I mean, you're saying reach out to them and so on, and I appreciate that, but I just don't see the fever breaking. I haven't seen it.
So I really believe the solution long-term for America is going to be ground up more than top down. I mean, I do think that administrations can do things, and there can be, for example, policy put into place. I'm keeping my fingers crossed with education, for example, where people are educated in school about social psychology and things like the Ash Conformity Study, the Milgram Obedience Study, the Zimbardo Prison Study, to understand we like to think we're rational. We like to think that nobody can influence us, but we're human and we're wired to be influenced, really. And the issue is, where's the locus of control for this influence? Is it in you as an adult, or are you looking to some external authority figure to tell you what reality is, whether it's a minister or a rabbi or a teacher or a politician? We want to be masters of our own lives and our own minds, because ultimately we have to look ourselves in the mirror at night, right, Pete, and say, did I do a good day? I would a good person today.
I mean, I do. I like to think about life that way, and I want to think that most people generally want to be good people and do the right thing. But I also have such a hard time with people looking at Donald Trump and saying, yeah, there's a person I'll support because he's not a good guy who has never done the right thing. And that, I think, I mean, we all struggle with how is it that people have fallen into favor with this guy so hard and for so long?
I've never talked to a Trump supporter who said he's always done the wrong thing and he's a bad person. They'll minimize the fact that he's lied tens of thousands of times. They'll disregard it and say, everybody lies, or all politicians lie. Right. But I would argue that we tend to believe what we want to believe. And when you're feeling, and this is really important with the pandemic and the economic stresses that we're all under, people are freaked out, like really, really uncertain, worried, panicked, and they're much more susceptible to being manipulated by an authoritarian who talks like this, I have the truth.
Right.
I can fix everything. Trust me. Nobody knows more than the generals than I do. Nobody knows more about the economy than I do. And you want to believe that he's so confident, you get deceived by that certainty element instead of realizing the guy's a malignant narcissist. He's a pathological liar. He's trained to be convincing. That's how he survived.
Yeah, there's a lot of research, and you've written about this, obviously, you talked about it, that when we're sick or threatened by disease, we seem uniquely susceptible to scams and scammers throughout human history. Is that right?
Absolutely. And it's, we're human, like we're not perfect and we make mistakes. But the critical thing is if you realize you're driving towards a cliff and you're going to go over the cliff and you're going to die, if you really understand that, instead of listening, oh, trust me, the car is going to fly. It's going to fly really beautifully. It's got great wings. If you believe that, you're going to die. And so your common sense, your critical thinking needs to kick in and go, maybe I should slow down, get out of my car, look over the cliff's edge, and evaluate whether I want to drive over this.
But I'm not even sure that we need your metaphor of the car on the cliff when we're seeing, I just read it today in the New York Times, so many anecdotes about people in hospitals and taking their final breath going, it's not real. I can't believe this is happening. It's not real. They don't believe that COVID is real. You have people trying to get into hospitals, trying to look in for themselves to see if people are actually in the ICU, as if the nurses and doctors who are risking their lives every day are lying. And so the idea that they don't believe that the virus is real and that the pandemic is as dangerous as impactful as it is, that it seems to be the one of the only examples we need with these folks. I mean, forget about the science around climate change.
It's totally tragic. And I guess, I resisted last year calling it a death cult, but it's clearly a death cult now.
Right.
And in the Cult of Trump book, I actually wrote about Jim Jones and what happened when Congressman Ryan went down with Ron Harris of NBC, and he realized that he was going, the end was coming because he was going to get arrested and put in jail. And he would rather have killed everybody than be taken into custody. And that's my worry about this next period. It's incredibly dangerous period. I'm an optimist, and I think there are enough, people with survival instincts that are not in the cult of Trump that won't let him press the nuclear football or do other, things. But I'm also wondering, when is the Secret Service agent going to put him under citizen's arrest and walk him into jail and take him out because he's so obviously ill? And top forensic psychiatrists who've studied dangerousness have ample evidence that this is a dangerous human being and should not have any power at all.
Speaking of that he's ill, and the Secret Service agents, so are about 133 Secret Service agents apparently that have been exposed to COVID.
I remain an optimist because I have a kid and I want to live and I want the planet to live. And I also want to teach what I know, which is mind control is real. Intelligent people can be hypnotized. The people at Heaven's Gate thought they were beaming up to a spaceship in the tail of the Hale-Bopp comet. So when they were having the pills and putting the plastic bags over their head, they really believed that they were going to a spaceship. They were not thinking, I am terminating my life and I will never see anyone ever again. And it's tragic, but it's a real lesson for the future of humanity. What do we want? We want to be in an authoritarian country or world, or do we want to fight for human rights and democratic principles, which I think, as a former cult member where I had my human rights taken away from me, it's worth fighting for.
Well, that's for sure. What do you see, if anything, in your research in terms of history when other cult leaders have been defeated? It's not always clear cut like an election. A lot of Trump supporters, I think 8 out of 10, don't even believe that he was defeated because he's saying that it's all been rigged. And he's been saying that since even long before the election, ceding the ground. Is there any, I'm talking to historians and experts on authoritarianism, like Ruth Ben-Ghiat's got a new book. Kenneth C. Davis has a book similarly titled about similar issues, Strongmen. And I wonder if there's anything in history that you can compare Trump to in terms of what breaks the fever, if not the defeat in a free and fair election.
Well, we had the free and fair election, and he lost. And of course, he said the 2016 election was rigged, even before he won it.
That's true,
right? But I guess I want to say that we are living in the world of influence, not the post-truth world, but the age of influence. And because truth is still truth and facts are still facts, and there are no such things as alternative facts. There are lies. And that we are the victims of psychological warfare techniques implemented through platforms who've gathered our personal data and know which buttons to push for each person to get them to behave in a certain way. And I wrote a blog about the Great Hack, The Social Dilemma, and People You May Know, 3 absolutely must-see documentaries if you want to understand 21st century mind control. And it's incumbent upon everyone to educate yourself, to protect yourself, educate your family and friends, and then start reaching out to, colleagues, coworkers, people in your spheres. And if you have friends and family who are Trumpers, don't say, we won. Don't, gloat. Just say, hey, how are you? Been thinking of you. Would like to reconnect with you. Can we talk football? Can we just reminisce about the good old days? And just rebuild the connections, because that's what's going to help people to exit and realize that all the people who voted against Trump are really good people who just care and want to live, want to survive, want to have a good economy, want to have human rights.
I think one of the questions is, one of the things people struggle with is how can you be a good person and support such a bad person? And I think sometimes I'll make that argument to Trump supporters, and they'll often not either play dumb or really genuinely not know that Trump did or said a thing or screwed over this person. They'll not know. And I think that goes back to what you're talking about in terms of the algorithms and what they hear and see, and the fact that they're not paying attention to a lot of the same sources you are. But at the same time, Trump's always an asshole. He's always been a horrible person to everybody. Like you can't cherry pick some great moments out, I feel like, because every day he provides with you a hard moment. So I come back to I have such a struggle with Trump supporters, and I really want to have this new chapter of the podcast, me taking your advice, Stephen, and trying to reach out and find common ground and help them break free of this cult mentality about anything politically, by the way. Think for yourself and critically think.
It's very doable, frankly, but you have to be flexible and you have to be patient. By the way, I just listened to a wonderful book I'd like to plug by Celeste Headley.
Oh, I love Celeste. My wife just suggested something.
The Art of Conversation.
Yes.
She wrote a new one on doing nothing, but the conversation one is a must read, or I actually listened to it on Audible. Everyone should listen to it because we need to kind of realize the detrimental effects of the digital world on our brains. And we have to get back to real human interactions and listening to each other and not thinking what we're going to answer next, but actually engaging with the human experience.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your last response because I was thinking about my next question. Great advice. And I know Celeste Headley, we go way back. I'll reach out to her. You're the second person to tell me about her work, her recent work. So yeah, she's great. So thank you so much for your time, as always, sir. I'd like to keep our conversation going, and I hope everybody will support your work. All the links to it are in the show notes. And Stephen Hassan, so great to touch base with you again. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. And remember, if you were a victim of a controlling relationship or cult, and you're on social media and you want to add a hashtag, I got out,
there you go.
Create a less stigmatized reality for those of us who've been in.
Hashtag I got out. Hashtag I got out. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Pete.
All right, Stephen Hassan, and check him out online. His website, freedomofmind.com. On Twitter at Stephen Hassan. Get his books. Tell him you heard him here. Always great talking with him. And if you haven't joined us on the stand-up Discord chat, the Discord platform, if you haven't already joined our community as a paid subscriber, you get access to both the Zoom Hangouts and the Discord chat, which there's always a lot of interesting topics to discuss any time of night. You're never alone when you're part of our online community. This is exactly the kind of community I hope to build. We're here together making it happen. Real friendships are actually being forged here, and we welcome everyone to join in and be a part of the community. So for more information on the Patreon and Discord, check the links in the show notes. That is it for me. I will talk to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up.